Okay, we have the lovely Diana Liu in front of me. She is joining us between running lots of errands and between her practice. And I'm so grateful, Diana, that you've taken the time to do this because we are going to get into some really juicy topics. Thank you for being here.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to, dive into our conversations today.
Me as well. And before we hit record, you were showing me some prototypes of some sound bowls that you are co creating. And so that is my segue into letting the listeners know that we are going to get deep into some nervous system work, some nervous system rewiring. We are going to get into using the right tools to support you on your birth and motherhood journey. And before we get into that, Diana, I am so curious to hear about the birth of your child. We spoke about it before, and it is a lovely story. So I cannot wait for the listeners to hear it.
Yeah, okay, we're gonna dive straight into the first story.
Right into
Okay,
it.
right in there. So my son, Noah, he's 2 years old now. And and it just brings me back to, and it just feels like yesterday that he was just born, right? Time goes by so fast. And with birth, I had heard a lot of like not really great birth stories, and it has been so hard for women, and really honoring that process. But I was actually just looking for this whole spectrum of birth where, okay, like what are the other possibilities of birth, and how can I support myself in ways that are holistic, that can maybe make things a little bit more easeful, even though birth is an initiation and it is very, very, very challenging. And so I just want to start by like how I prepped for my birth, because I think that was an important piece that was really supportive for my entire like laboring process and birth. Um,
Absolutely. Yes, let's go there.
Okay. So I actually took a course to help give me some of just the more holistic knowledge and wisdom behind, okay, like the relationship between pain that you could get from the contractions, and how we can support ourselves to reduce some of that intensity. And so that's what the course taught me. So it was called Mighty Mamas, and it was a woman that had birthed, she has 7 children, and
Wow.
then it was a midwife who has midwife for probably 30 plus years. And it was both of their shared wisdom in this program. And I remember one of the things that really stuck with me was that when we are feeling really tense and there's a lot of fear coming up, and our muscles are all tight and our nervous system is going into that fight and flight, the intensity of the contractions and the pain will escalate. And it's through actually breathing into it and relaxing our muscles and going more into that rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system. That's when the oxytocin, which is nature's our natural pain alleviator that our body has innately, that's when the oxytocin rises. And so when that rises, and that does rise in birth naturally for women, because our bodies are designed to have this natural pain reliever that amplifies during birth, but we just allow that process to increase. And so that really shifted the way I saw birth. And then another piece was my midwife literally telling me the number one thing that you can do during labor is rest. And she kept, and my midwife was amazing. She was also very holistic. And she's like, after witnessing hundreds and hundreds of births, she said that was the thing that helped women sustain when our laboring process sometimes was 30 hours, right? There's a lot of, especially for our first birth, we don't know how long that's going to be. And for my particular birth, I was actually pregnant until 43 weeks.
Oh, wow.
But I really took care of my health. Like that was one thing I devoted to, was eating really well and nourishing my body with whole foods and very low sugar, with just a diversity of vegetables and fruits and just a diverse palate. And the other piece was rest. And my two favorite ways to rest during when I was pregnant was sound healing. So for those who don't know what sound healing is, it's one of the most ancient healing technologies that we have. It's 10,000 years old. And that's how long it dates back. And sound healing has been in all different cultures, whether that's in South America or India, like Africa, China, it's all over the world, and it uses specific instruments. So I have, like you mentioned, some of my sound healing instruments behind me that I've been co-creating and designing. But these instruments, they resonate at healing frequencies. And so one of the healing frequencies would be 432 hertz, which is the frequency of nature. And so by listening to, these are crystal bowls. So they're made from quartz crystals, but there's also like Himalayan bowls, different chimes, and they're all resonant. They at very particular frequencies, like 432 hertz, that help to entrain our brain waves, and they start to slow down our brain waves. And our bodies are 70% water. So water is a very potent carrier of sound. The sound will travel into our tissues and our cells, which are mostly filled with fluid. And this helps to release tension in our bodies. It helps to downregulate our nervous system into the parasympathetic state and take us into deep rest. So that's one of the tools I was using when I was pregnant and during the birth. So my birth was, I was laboring for 24 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And what one thing that really helped me was I played frequency music and sound healing music the entire birth. Most of it was Tibetan bowls on replay. And
Mm.
my partner was like, I'm never listening to Tibetan bowls again. So much
Never,
Tibetan
ever,
bowls.
ever.
But honestly, like that helped me get into actually like a deep rest state, even though there was lots of intensity of contractions. I could, I, and so that was one of the ways I supported myself, as well as this modality called Yoga Nidra. And for
Mm.
those who don't know what Yoga Nidra is, you might hear the word yoga and think like there's movement and stuff, but it's actually one posture, which is Shavasana, when you are in starfish pose and you just listen to the guidance and it helps. And so in the guidance, there's some breathing, there's body scan, there's some visualization, but the whole guidance will take you to the point right before falling asleep. So nidra in Sanskrit means yogic sleep. And
Mm.
so you actually get guided right before light sleep. And so this is called the like hypnagogic state, where the subconscious doorway is open, where our brain waves again shift into these slower states, delta, theta, alpha states, and our body goes into deep, deep, deep relaxation. So it honestly feels like the best nap ever, but there's all this healing that happens underneath the surface. And if there's anything you want to rewire in your programming, if there's a lot of fear coming up around things, you can work with an intention. In Yoga Nidra, it's called a sankalpa. And this intention, for example, one of my intentions during birth was I trust my body. My body is wise, right? That was one of the intentions I was working with, to rewire my brain, my subconscious patterning of any fear. That no, I trust my body is wise and it knows exactly how to birth my baby. And so those were two practices that were really supportive.
Mm.
And so
I'm just picturing you. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm
yeah.
just picturing you saying that to yourself, saying that to your baby, to your body in the actual labor experience with the Tibetan bowls playing in the background, and how supportive that must have been to you to just be able to navigate the several hours of labor.
Yeah, yeah, no, that was so helpful. And then the other piece that was really helpful was the water. So being in the bath, literally my whole laboring process was between being in the bath and being on the toilet. Being on the bath. A lot of women labor in the toilet, in the bathroom.
Yes.
It was literally,
Yes.
yeah, I was switching back and forth, and the water with the sound healing frequencies, again, like water is the carrier of sound. So that resonance was like even stronger in
Mm.
the water. And I could just feel like myself actually being able to relax. And then one of the key pieces was the breath as well. So the breath also helps to take that nervous system into more that rest and digest state. And I discovered this amazing breath that helped me get through each contraction, which my acupuncturist actually shared that with me through, she learned it through hypnobirthing.
Mm.
And this breath, so I'm also a yoga teacher, and there's all these different breaths that I knew through yoga. And so I was trying all sorts of breaths during the birth, and I realized I thought I would be using a lot of the like ujjayi breath, where if anyone's practiced yoga, it's that like ocean wave breath,
Mm.
right? Where you're kind of these just deep breaths in and out. And then also I thought I'd be using a lot of releasing breath. So that inhale through the nose and exhale at the mouth. I thought I would be using those two breaths. But what I found when I was in the birth portal using those breaths was it was actually me trying to like push away the pain. I was in resistance to the contractions, and that was actually making the pain more intense. And so when I switched the breath to this oceanic wave breath, I forget the exact name for it, but that's what I call it, is so when the contractions came, what I was doing was I was inhaling, and then when the contraction got bigger, I would inhale again. And as the contraction got even bigger, like a wave, I would inhale all the way to the max intensity. And then as the contraction started to go down, I would exhale. So
Mm.
I was actually breathing with the contractions and inviting them in and meeting that intensity with my inhales. And once
Mhm.
I unlocked that in my birth portal, like the contractions got significantly almost not enjoyable, but it was just like tolerable, and it wasn't, and the really big ones when I met that with the breath, it was so supportive. And even after 24 hours at home laboring, so I wanted to have a home birth. That was my intention. And I could have kept going, to be honest. I could have stayed at home longer, but what ended up happening was because I was 43 weeks overdue, my midwife was not there. It's just me and my doula. And my doula was amazing. She again also highlighted that like rest was the most important thing during labor and obviously postpartum and third trimester. But she so my midwife wasn't around, and I remember it being kind of like really stormy that night. And then once my water broke, they found meconium. Like she saw that there's meconium. And for those who do not know what meconium is, it's when the baby poops. And some of that poop comes, like you can see it when the water breaks. And there's really the only risk to meconium, and I did a lot of research around like what my risks were, because I'm also a trained dentist, so I have a lot of like scientific background, a lot of medical background. So I was knowing like what are my pros and cons for each innervation and each situation. I was kind of nerding out on that. Then when the doula saw there was meconium, I didn't freak out or anything. Like I knew that if the baby aspirates the meconium, that's when it becomes like very, very dangerous. But if the baby swallows it or it's just kind of around, it's actually good for their microbiome health. And so there's the positive of that. And because he was 43 weeks overdue, yeah, there was high likelihood there's going to be meconium because he's been incubating for so long that he's probably going to poop. So anyway, so we ended up doing a transfer to the hospital, and man, those transfers are really hard. Like I did not want to go. I didn't want to go in the car. But once we made it to the hospital, we're really fortunate that the hospital we have here, I live on it's not really an island, but it kind of feels like an island. You have to take a ferry from Vancouver to the Sunshine Coast where I live. And so the hospitals are apparently just very, very holistic, and they're supportive of like making the women feel as comfortable as possible. And so I knew I was in good hands when I got to the hospital, and they had the big bath, and there was no other women birthing that night. So it was just me.
Oh
And
my
that
gosh.
was such a gift
Yes.
because it was like I could really go inwards. And then they had this big room with a big bathtub, and my doula like put these like fake candles on and then put my Tibetan bowl music. And I was able to like go back to being in the water and laboring a little more there. And yeah. And then I was actually doing my own checks because I learned how to do that. So I could feel Noah's head, like probably it was like two like this amount, it was right there. And it was right there for quite some time. Even at home, I could feel that. And so I was like, oh, it's taking some time. Like, why is it taking so long? And yeah, and then so I thought I would be birthing more like on all fours, but I ended up actually getting out of the water, or I thought I could birth in the water. But yeah, so we birthed outside of the water with the support of my doula. And
Did you want to birth in the water?
I really wanted to birth in the water. And especially because he was a Scorpio, I thought he would definitely birth in the water.
Yeah.
But I ended up birthing with like the birthing balls lying on the sidelining.
Yeah.
And I
And
guess
was that your direction, or like did your doula or the
my
staff?
doula was suggesting it because I think what was happening, which I found out later, he had a nuchal hand. So he had his
Okay.
hand on his face, and his head was really, really big. And
Okay.
so those two pieces made that process a lot harder. And so when you sideline and you have that birthing ball, and she helped kind of like, get in a position where it allows things to be more open.
Hmm.
Once we figured that out together, and then that like really deep primal breath took over, where yeah, like it was, yeah, you just, the body took over, and it was so, as you know, like and any woman that's, yeah, birth knows that. But it was so funny because I thought he would, how like usually the baby comes out and then will come back in, and then when the head comes out there's a pause, and then maybe like some of the shoulder comes out, there's a pause. As soon as we got Noah's head out and his nuchal hand out, he literally just shot out. And my partner
Wow.
caught him, and he was covered in meconium, and I was covered in meconium. That's like, and actually, there was one point where Ollie said it was quite hilarious that when his head came out, his eyeballs came out, and he thought he was an alien. He's like, is this a human? And then as soon as more of him came, I was like, oh, thank goodness. Now he's a human. But it's
Okay,
just
yes,
the
yes.
pressure, right?
He's a human.
The pressure, yeah. And also what I learned about birth, it's like when the head comes out, it's like a little bit and it goes back in, and it comes out a little more and it goes back in. And so that's just like normal. And for me, it took a lot of that for really him to get down. And it was, the whole birth was, I didn't have any interventions, no epidural, nothing. It was just my breath, like really going into my nervous system, and the deep rest that I was able to receive more in my third trimester in preparation, but also during the birth. I wasn't obviously sleeping, but I know that state when I get into yoga nidra, like that really, when you get into like meditation, I was in a meditative state, like whole birth, the whole
Oh,
birth.
wow.
I was in a meditation basically. Yeah.
Wow.
And so, yeah. And then Ollie caught Noah and he just came out like a water slide. And because I had, that was one of my fears that he would just get stuck or his shoulders would get stuck. And then you have to take the vacuum. And like, that was, a fear of mine. But I was so grateful that he came out like immediately, really quickly. And then he cried like, he literally didn't even have a pause with his cry. He was crying as he was flying out. And that was
Oh,
another one of
wow.
my fears was like, that first breath, right? That was a fear of mine. And then I did have a fear of the cord because when I was born, my mom told me that's what happened to me was I was wrapped around with the cord, but my cord ended up being so short, like so short. And apparently that's very rare. But yeah, and then when he came out, we waited before the placenta was because I did a lot of research on like the benefits of delayed cord cutting and how, it's basically the child's lifeline, right?
Mhm.
And in many cultures, spiritually, they say the placenta is like the twin brother or sister of the baby,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
honoring the placenta, it's like it looks like a tree, and one of the things that the doctors were scared of because I was 43 weeks overdue, that my placenta would be unhealthy or like start to die, or I don't. But when it came out, the doctor was like, "Oh my God, this is the most healthy placenta," and he was just like amazed with the state of the placenta. And
Mm.
anyways, they respected all my wishes of like delayed cord cutting and not rushing the process, not giving me any like what's that medication for helping the placenta?
Pitocin.
Pitocin, right?
Pitocin, yeah.
Yeah, and even like when I was 43 weeks overdue, there was some pressure of inducing me, but
Mhm.
I intuitively like felt that I wanted to wait until the baby was ready. And I actually felt pretty good at 43 weeks, considering I was massive because of all that rest and nervous system tending that I was really intentional about. And so I didn't end up having an induction, and even though that was the recommendation. So there was a lot of pieces where I felt like I felt really empowered. I felt like I did my research. I knew the pros and cons of each thing, and I really trusted the wisdom of my body and my intuition through the whole process.
Mm.
So it felt like I really am proud of myself for that.
I'm proud. I had nothing to do with this, but I am proud of you too. Just hearing how, like, even though there was some external guidance to do something, you were like, okay, I hear that. And when I tune into myself and I see how I feel, what's my internal compass saying, you were like, I actually feel okay waiting until I go into labor spontaneously. And that's one of the big messages on this podcast is like, yes, hear the advice that you're getting from people who are experienced and are like quote unquote experts in this field. And an even more valid resource for you is that internal voice, that internal compass, your internal authority. What is your body saying? What is your intuition guiding you to do? And I also want to just circle back to the meconium. How did it feel for you when you saw meconium in the waters?
Mm,
How did it feel for you to transfer? Like one of your fears was, that first cry. And I think with meconium, that can, elevate a little bit of that fear and
mm,
tension that we can feel. And so, yeah, I know when I was in my experience, because I was also in the water, I was also on the toilet a lot, that sacred dilation station.
yes, the gravity, right, really helps
Yes,
open you up when you're on the toilet. Yeah, for
it
sure.
totally helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that if I were called to transfer, that like, yes, it would be very difficult. So I want to know what that felt like, and like how were you able to get back into that zen, like more zen state, that labor land, planet birth? And do you feel like this might be a leading question, but do you feel like you had been training for that?
Mm, yeah. Like I felt like I was part of, I think, the prep around birth is really sitting with our fears
Mm.
and sitting with it in the sense of like, okay, I know this is a fear and it could happen and it is possible, but it's kind of like meditation when we go down these fear spirals and we're kind of downhill spiraling, which creates more cortisol in our body, adrenaline, those stress hormones amplify. Like it doesn't really help our situation. And especially when we're in the birth portal. And so part of my training was to already look at like what the pros and cons were. I also am very logical, right? So the pro of having meconium was that it was really great for the microbiome health and it's not harmful if it wasn't aspirated and the only danger was when it was aspirated. So when I saw meconium in real time during birth, I the the thing that I kept repeating to myself was like, if I feel safe and if I feel grounded in my nervous system, and if I'm not going into these like what ifs and these spirals of something that I don't even know is happening, like if I'm not downhill spiraling, because that's what's going to increase the pain of the contraction. That's what's like my stress is increasing the baby's stress. So we have this co regulation dance, right? And I talk a lot about co regulation a lot with the programs that I facilitate and the coaching with when our nervous system is feeling grounded and we're able to feel more relaxed and that oxytocin's up and the serotonin, the happier hormones and our stress hormones are down, that just creates a more safe environment for our babies. And if we can, and so then that's also co-regulating. So my nervous system is affecting the baby's nervous system. So, but I can keep my nervous system as in that less in that fight and flight, then I know I have a better chance of not something bad happening to the baby. So that was my internal process. And then when I got to the hospital, I mean, there was definitely this like, because my doula was like, "Can you feel movement in the baby?" She was worried. My partner was worried. And I was like, okay, I'm not gonna go into that worry. Like it's not helpful right now. And so but I that a little bit of that was definitely coming up. I could really see that in my consciousness. And then when I got to the hospital and then they checked the baby's heart rate, because that was the main thing. We wanted to just check the heart rate, make sure that was okay. And then when that was all good, I'm like, I had that exhale, like, okay, he's fine. He's good. I knew
Mm.
he was okay. But there was also this little voice of doubt, but I was also trying not to like psych myself up and going into like full fear mode as well. So that
Mm.
was the internal process that was happening.
I really like that. And I think sometimes we can have these visions of what we want our birth to be like. And fear can arise when we need any kind of like monitoring or whatever, or like something happens that's unexpected. And I think when you do tap into your intuition, you have like all these tools available to you, including the fetal heart monitor, which can offer you a little sense of relief, that exhale that you described, so that you can go back inward into labor land and get into those like theta brain states where your body is doing what it is physiologically designed to do. And so often on this podcast, I don't want women to fear the hospital or certain monitoring devices or interventions. Understand the pros and cons. Use
Mhm.
it when your intuition is guiding you to use it, and have the skill set, do the training so that you have the ability to go back inward. And so I think your story like truly portrays and depicts the power of having all the tools available to you so that you can go back inward and use your intuition to guide you on that journey.
That's so well said. And yeah, and I think that the blend of both worlds. So, I mean, like the hospital is so supportive if there's any sort of like medical emergency that happens, and they're really trained and well equipped with that. And at the same time, as women, we also have choice. And one of the things I wish that the medical system would do more of is, because as a dentist, I do the same, is when I give options, I always give the pros and cons. So I always give what the risks are if you take this medication, or if you do this, if you decide on this, like what are the pros and cons of each decision, and how does that impact my type of contractions. I just wish there was more exposure of that and more communication of that, so that people knew they had more of like an informed choice of their decisions. And so even in the hospital, like the monitoring that they gave me was so helpful, but also they wanted to monitor me while I was in the bathtub. And I said, no, I said, can you do periodic checks instead? Because it really, it disrupted my like inward meditative state. And I felt that was more important than this like constant monitoring of the heart rate. And
Hmm.
so that was my decision, right? And I wanted monitoring, but I didn't want monitoring all the time. So just also knowing that you have choice over how the monitoring is. You have I didn't actually want the doctors to do a check right before I was, like right before Noah was coming out. I knew where his head was. I knew he was right there, and I knew he was going to come out. And so I didn't need someone checking me right at that moment. And that was my decision. And maybe there's, certain risks around that, but that intuitively felt like the right thing. And you can also make those decisions too. So, and yeah, so I think it's a both and both. Your intuition and guidance is really important. Also, I feel like just being educated around birth, like knowing what are the pros and cons of each decision, doing the research, like going in so that you can advocate for yourself and know what you're getting into, as well as the medical system is also there to support us. And I so appreciate actually like the postpartum part of the hospital. So after Noah was born, the nurses taking care of him so that I could rest, so that my partner could rest and deliver food to us. And we were thinking, like, you know what, if we did that at home, it would have been actually way harder without their support. So having them around for the next couple days was like having the village around, right? Where we had moments of rest, and knowing that he was okay because we had all the staff around and the experience. So that was very helpful too. And I think, even though we have these like visions of how things will go, I think kind of looking back at all of us have such unique birth stories, and we grow and learn so much from each. And it's, for me, my situation, even though I wanted the water home birth, it was perfect. And I was so happy with that for my first birth.
That is so lovely to hear. And that's also something I find that is so beneficial with midwives. Some people have mixed experiences with midwives, and I understand that. And there's a whole history that I went into with a guest on the podcast about midwives only being legalized once they took on the medical model. So, kind of letting go of their traditional therapies and approaches and holistic approaches to birth, taking on the medical model so that they can be legalized and regulated. And so there's a history involved here, but also I will say that my experience with the midwives postpartum was like, compared to nothing else. We often don't have the village around us that our ancestors had. And to have women who are experienced, who understand the process, who have often gone through it themselves, be able to come to you afterwards to support you and ensure that everything's okay with the baby, everything's okay with you is such a gift,
Mhm.
that support afterwards.
Yeah, that support afterwards. I feel like that piece is not talked about enough. That postpartum bubble, like going back, I wish I would have done more prep, or, for the postpartum and even for breastfeeding. Like that was one of the biggest challenges I had, was breastfeeding. I had literally everything that you can think of that was a challenge in breastfeeding that women had challenges with, which I had low supply. Noah had a tongue tie, so he couldn't latch properly. And so I had to put him on formula for the first period, like a month, in order as we waited for he did the tongue procedure and the healing, and then worked with like a lactation consultant to help rebuild that, and then mastitis, like all the things. That was my also initiation for me, was the breastfeeding. And even in my culture, traditionally mothers, and this was like, this stems from Chinese medicine, is the 40-day rest period for postpartum. So in my culture, and I love this about my culture, is that the only mother's sole purpose is to rest and breastfeed the baby, and the diaper changes, all the cleaning and stuff is all taken care of by the family. Although I didn't have, although I actually didn't have that 40-day bubble, because of we had to go a lot of back and forth to the hospital because of the breastfeeding challenges, and he also had a little bit of jaundice as well. I knew the importance of rest, and the yoga nidra and the sound healing again was like so supportive for the postpartum, that even though I got imperfect rest, where mothers, we have to wake up every 3 hours through the night to breastfeed our baby. So our sleep is completely disrupted. And I think and this is like part of my mission for Rest to Thrive, is supporting mothers to get rest, even though our nighttime rest is imperfect. So, how can we still get rest when all of that is disrupted? And this is where the Yoga Nidra is amazing, because in that 30 minutes of the Yoga Nidra meditation that you can listen to, it literally feels like you've had 3 hours of sleep in 30 minutes. Because Yoga Nidra, they did a lot of like scientific studies on it, and the way it impacts our brain and the brain waves, where they were measuring that Yoga Nidra, even people were getting delta brain waves, which is what you can only get during deep sleep. You can also tap into delta brainwaves during yoga nidra. So if you can plug in like 2 yoga nidras a day during postpartum, that's going to completely shift the game, because rest is so pertinent for our mental health, right? And I feel like that really prevented like postpartum depression, which a lot of women have because of the lack of sleep. And the obviously there's a lot of hormonal changes as we're entering into postpartum, but if you're able to access any type of deep restorative rest, it'll rebalance your hormones and increase that serotonin, that oxytocin and dopamine, so the happy hormones will rise. You'll have more mental clarity, because rest actually like gets rid of any sort of mental fog, because there's literally this system that's called the glymphatic system that access the nighttime cleaning crew, that clears out waste products in our brain, that gives us more mental clarity and improves our memory, which as mothers, like our memory starts going because of the disruption of rest. But if we can get some rest, then we can really support our memory, our learning and insights, our ability to focus, and it also turns down that stress response that keeps us like on edge and wired, and so and then it's like food for our gut too, right? So it supports your digestion, and if anyone struggles with like IBS or inflammatory illnesses like autoimmune, rest will help with that as well. And obviously you're healing in postpartum, right? Rest is what will boost our immune system and help us heal, which we all know that when we're sick, what do we do? Is we rest. When we're injured, what do? We rest. Our body has this natural healing mechanism. And I also often think about it as these like worker bees that are really working hard underneath the surface, doing all these things for us to heal our bodies and restore that homeostasis and restore that balance, so that we can be healthy. And I feel like rest is even more important than nutrition, than exercise. Because when you're sleep deprived and you're exercising, like you're not being able to get the full benefits from,
Mm.
right, from whatever you're doing. If you're eating well but you're not resting, your body's not able to absorb the nutrients as well or metabolize the food as well. So rest is just like foundational, but we live in a cultural narrative that like rest is a waste of time or it's unproductive, or there's a lot of like cultural programming around how, rest is like lazy or something we earn after after doing something productive. And really though, rest is like the foundations for our health and for our mental wellness and for our vitality. And so if mothers can even get a little bit of rest with the yoga nidra, with these other tools that maybe you might not know about, that can be really supportive during, these phases of birth and postpartum and just phases in our life in motherhood, because it's exhausting.
Yeah, there are so many different seasons, and we need to have the proper rest, have the proper foundations in place. As you were talking, I was just thinking if there was a pharmaceutical that did all the things that you're describing, this would be like a multi-billion-dollar like magic silver bullet pill that we've all been waiting for, and it's available to us all the time. Our body has this innate ability to do what it does when we offer it the space and give it the opportunity to do what it's meant to do, right?
Yeah, and absolutely. And another thing I do want to speak on is like a lot of women do struggle with rest. Like they feel like if they try to rest, it feels restless and uncomfortable. And if you do, and that's totally normal too, like if you've been kind of on this like go, go, go train for a long time where our stress hormones are higher and there's more adrenaline and cortisol in our bodies naturally, there might be, when we start to rest more, we start to notice this restlessness. But if you can even just be consistent with it, even though can feel uncomfortable, our nervous system over time starts to get rewired. So a lot of us, if we've been having this like hustle go mode, which was me for so many years, I had major burnout, which is why I how I even discovered all these different modalities that took me into more rested states was because my nervous system was like completely shot. I was completely burnt out and I had adrenal fatigue, which I feel like is very common, especially as mothers too. And when that happens, our nervous system is the comfort zone for our nervous system is this go, go, go mode, is a nervous system in overdrive. And when you're shifting from a nervous system in overdrive into a nervous system that feels safe in rest, there can be a transitional period to rewire that nervous system patterning so that our nervous system actually starts to crave rest and feel safe to rest, and that relaxation and restoration is like what our body really deeply needs. But there is this transitory period that I wanted to speak on, that if you're like, I can't rest, like I can't sit still, I always need to be doing something, I always need to be doing something productive, like this is what I support women on that path of rewiring their nervous system so that they can get energy not from adrenaline and cortisol, which is on pressure. That's a form of energy, right? But then there's the energy that we get from deep restorative rest.
Mm. Yeah, it's the difference between energy that depletes you, that will result in a crash, that's not
Mhm.
sustainable, and the energy that is actually nourishing and restorative and offers your body the opportunity to heal whatever might need to be healed. Our body creates a lot of cells, it's always replicating and proliferating, and we need to have that space and give our body the opportunity to clear what our body doesn't need. And so this work is really important. It also reminds me of, I think it was just an article that came out in the initial times of the pandemic when everyone was
Mm,
staying in. And there were actually fewer rates of preterm birth. And
mm,
the authors correlated it with the decreased commuting time that pregnant mothers had to be involved in and going to work, like back and forth from work every day. And so just that little bit of a break for a lot of mothers resulted in better birth outcomes. So
mm,
imagine if you're giving yourself the opportunity to rest in the ways that you're describing, like what kind of profound implications that has for you as a mother, for your baby that is gestating inside of you, for the birth outcomes, for the postpartum period, for the emotional climate of your home after inviting this new human into your world. So it sounds like foreign to us because we're conditioned, as you said, to be more productive, and that's like the standard of being a worthy human.
mm.
And now you're inviting us to actually rest, and that's a priority. That in it itself seems very backwards to us, but it's not when we look at traditional cultures, the way that we've evolved. We are meant to have these periods of rest.
Yeah, I love that you acknowledged that and how ancestrally we were in sync with the sun, right? And the season. So we would be working during the summertime and growing crops and hunting and gathering. And then in the winter time, it was like time for rest and it was candlelight and rituals and rhythms. And then historically, actually, since the Industrial Revolution, that was like a major shift in culture for this treating humans like machines, basically, where, even children were exploited to work in the factories because they had little hands, and mothers and women were working in these factories for 12 to 16-hour shifts with little breaks, and then expected to be at home to care for their families. And so this exhausted woman, this exhausted mother that had to be constantly doing things in self-sacrifice. And then at that time too, if you were doing things for yourself or tending to your self-care, that was considered selfish. So there
Mm-hmm.
is a generational cultural programming that stems a big chunk of it was the Industrial Revolution and moving forwards of this, like, tying self-worth to productivity and being treated like machines rather than like humans, where we're more cyclic, and it's really listening to our biological needs and our needs of our body. So, yeah, so thank you for acknowledging that. So, like, that's why people feel like they can't rest, that they always need to be doing things. This isn't your fault. Like, this is a narrative from culture that has been passed down through the media, through movies, through music, through our great 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 grandparents that were in that era, that went through this, like, always need to be like hustling and working hard and self-sacrifice, and I'll rest when I'm dead, right? Maybe our great great grandparents had that, said that to us growing up. Or yeah, so anyway, so there's just like this cultural programming that is deep embedded in our subconscious, that this work that I support people with is to like rewire that deep programming and to know that's not even ours and it's not even our fault. And we've inherited these deep subconscious beliefs that isn't truly supportive for our greatest well-being.
Mm, yeah. Like it's not ours. That voice that's saying that to us, it's actually not ours. That's not the internal compass, that inner authority that I'm always guiding women to tap back into. That's something else. And knowing, like being able to discern where that's coming from can kind of be like a little breadcrumb that you can follow as to how to actually support your body on this journey.
Mm. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that work too, because I guess like in your work too, there's just even a lot of like subconscious programming of fear around
Mm.
birth, right? And that in our culture is very, very amplified of like, this can go wrong, or that can go wrong, or you can get this, or, you go into these different fear spirals, but there's not much in our culture that's like showing the other end of the spectrum, which is like, wow, birth can actually be like this whole spiritual experience. It can be meditative, it can be even blissful. Some people actually have blissful births, and that's not really talked about. And so sharing that full spectrum of birth, that yes, it can be really, really hard, and like, and honoring the difficulty of that and the struggles of that, but and at the same time honoring that it is like a sacred experience, and it can be very spiritual, and it can also be very empowering and positive. And when women can tap into that power that they have within us, because we've been doing it for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and if we weren't alive, like like it's just in our DNA, it's encoded in our bodies. Our bodies are designed to birth, and that's just what blows my mind of like we've been doing it without, not to, I'm not dismissing hospitals, but we've been doing it without hospitals for thousands of years,
Since
right?
the beginning of humanity,
Beginning of
right? Yeah.
humanity. It's like
Yeah.
tapping into that wisdom too. This ancient wisdom, I feel like is very, very, very important to not
Mm.
dismiss that piece in, yeah, in this
Yeah.
birth culture.
I agree. And it's like it's an equally valid subject, I guess. It's an equally valid tool to tap into on your journey. This has been like such an incredible experience, such an incredible conversation, like really picking your brain. Your presence when I'm around you is so beautiful and so lovely. And after you sharing the things that you do to support yourself, to support your body, support your nervous system, support your family, I understand why it is such a delight to be around you. People can really, it's palpable to be around someone with a regulated nervous system who prioritizes rest, prioritizes their self-worth not just from productivity, and is also someone who really can support others. You can support others, you can support your patients, you can support the people in your coaching containers more because you prioritize this deep rest in your system. So I just want the listeners to know that even over Zoom, I can feel it, but in person, it's such a beautiful thing to experience.
Aw, thank you so much. I really appreciate your words. And yeah, and that's what it is. It's like that piece is really the fuel for our vitality. The more we can lean in, remember that like rest comes first and then productivity after. And I just also want to acknowledge you and this beautiful community that you've created around these really important conversations of birth that can feel really like sometimes difficult to have, right? Because so many women have different experiences, but to also present like a very holistic perspective and these choices that women have in their birth experiences, and ways that we might not have that knowledge of, ways that we can support ourselves so that it can be a more, yeah, more empowering experience that we all desire as women. So yeah, so thank you for your work and the beautiful ripple effect that has in for women when we
Yeah.
can, yeah, go into
Yeah.
these pieces.
Yeah. It's like these conversations aren't easy to have because there's so many variables, but they are potent, they're powerful. And I know that they're going to get transmitted into the airwaves and received by the people who need to hear them at this time. And with that being said, I want to preface my last question to you by saying there is just this profound imprint that takes place when a new life is entering this reality. And that can be an imprint of love and safety and trust. These are all signatures of oxytocin. It's like this big welcome party for this new life that has just arrived. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's an imprint of mistrust. Sometimes it's an imprint of survival mode, of fear for whatever reason. And that's okay. It's not permanent. We can do things to repair. But you've shown us the power of preparation going into the birth portal. And I think that when enough women, when enough families are supported the way that they need to, are meant to be supported, desire to be supported, deserve to be supported, then we are going to birth this generation that is moving through the world from a place of love and safety and trust instead of what we're seeing today because of the high levels of trauma in the birth experience, almost
Mhm.
half, which
Mhm.
is not okay. And so we have this opportunity, this responsibility to take radical self responsibility in the birth experience as mothers. And so that is my roundabout way of asking you, what would you like to imprint onto the ears of the listeners? It's a lot of moms and moms to be, a lot of families preparing for birth. It's also a lot of women who want to birth something beautiful into the world, a mission led business, a creative endeavor, something like that. What would you like to imprint onto their ears?
Hmm. The message I would love to imprint is, I think, like tending to the health of our nervous system, to giving ourselves permission to rest is going to sustain you in ways that create a life that feels restored, you're tapped into your vitality and life force. And this is the imprint that we can give to our future generations. Even if you did have a there was trauma in your birth experience, and there, when we tend to our nervous system, this allows us to the opportunity to help heal that trauma. And then going forward, as our kids are toddlers and growing, when we tend to our nervous system, our kids feel that, and their nervous system starts to co-regulate to ours. And I realize that for me, it's not, I don't like educate as much to Noah. I actually tend to my own nervous system and rest so that his nervous system is calibrating to that. And I feel like that has a stronger imprint than telling him to like breathe, right? Right now, I'm just breathing with him and I'm modeling certain nervous system tools and practices and making it a fun game. That is the opportunity I think we have in this generation where he can start learning, his emotions at a young age. He can start learning these little tools that he can use to help regulate his own emotions when he's older. And this is the stuff I never had. I never had vocabulary around this. And so this is this rewiring of our nervous system, but also this generational imprinting that he can have growing up so that he knows when he's feeling overwhelmed, when stress is happening, when life is lifing, he has resources and tools to support himself as well as support his health, and live a life that feels sustainable, that's thriving rather than being in survival. This is why my business is called Rest to Thrive, because we can move from survival mode into a life of thriving through rest and nervous system health.
Mm. So beautiful. What a gift that you are offering to Noah. And it's not verbal, right? You're not preaching, you're not lecturing, you are showing. And that is so much more potent and so much more powerful to our kids. Diana, if people are curious as to how they can work with you, how they can learn more from you, how can they do that?
They can just reach out to me on my Instagram page, Rest to Thrive, or through my website, which is www.resttothrive.com.
Amazing. Those are going to be in the show notes for anyone curious. Thank you so,
Oh,
so,
and I
so.
also wanted to share, I do have a free yoga nidra meditation if anyone's interested in, you know, Tasting Yoga Nidra, there's a free meditation on my website that you can receive to get deep rest.
Amazing. Amazing. I'm going to go and download that right after this.
Amazing.
Thank you so much, love. This was so nourishing to my nervous system. I feel rested just talking to you, and I hope the listeners feel that too.
Oh, thank you, love. Thank you.